This is the Debunking Economics Podcast with Steve Keen and Phil Dobbie.
The Archives.
Episode 283. The Perils of Government Subsidies.
Well, Christmas is over for another year. People have stopped giving things away. Well, except for governments, of course. They always have a pile of money to support various individuals or companies, not just suppliers of PPE during pandemics, but industries that arguably might not survive without government money, like agriculture, for example. So how do governments choose where to put their money, given that they are notoriously bad at picking winners? And there is a danger, of course, that any subsidies they provide might have unintended consequences, like wiping out other businesses. And can we simplify the way governments support industry? We'll look at all of that, the perils of government subsidies. That's today on the Debunking Economics Podcast with Professor Steve Keen. I'm Phil Dobbie. Welcome along. So it seems whenever governments offer any sort of subsidy, it distorts the market somehow. If they were to subsidise electric cars, for example, will it stop investment in another technology which might have been even better for the environment? One of the reasons, of course, given in the UK for leaving the EU was because the UK was paying towards a pot of money that was being sloshed about in subsidies across Europe with no benefit to the people of Britain. In fact, if you subsidise one business or one country, then you do put another business or another country at a disadvantage. So, Steve, should governments just butt out of subsidies? Is it one of those things that seems like a good idea, but the repercussions of it are never really quite understood until it's too late?
I think it's one of those things where and you can certainly see this in the Australian case, where pork barrelling can be a real problem. And this is one of the reasons why, some people like Paul Samuelson, for example, who knew that banks created money, he was quite happy to say he didn't want people to understand that, because if they do, the politicians will exploit it and we'll get pork barrelling. He said, so it's better if they're ignorant about how the system actually works than knowing how it works. And what I think we have these days is ignorance combined with pork barrelling anyway, which is quite scary. So there is a danger to government subsidies, but at the same time, they can be very effective if you actually have a government doing the right thing. Then if you want to encourage, for example, a movement to electric vehicle manufacturing or to solar cell manufacturing, then a subsidy to get over the stage where a new business is unprofitable is quite a worthwhile idea.
Yeah, but you've got to pick, haven't you? You've got to pick the ideas, and then you've got to pick the companies. So in that introduction, who's to say, it's like, Ford Motor Cars, and, if people had chosen, they would have asked for a faster horse. The same with electric cars. Who's to say, you could subsidise electric cars for a long time, but there actually might have been a better way of providing the same solution that would be even better for the environment, or ultimately would be cheaper. You've got to pick the horse, and that's a dangerous thing for governments to do, isn't it?
Yeah, but this is where Mariano Mazzucato's work comes in, because it's nice to give a nice abstract statement like that, but often you can say, well, what actually is government? Things like a government institution like the CSIRO, for example, the Commonwealth of Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation, that used to be Australia's premier research body. What it does is it funds extremely intelligent people to play with new ideas and see what happens. And speaking from personal experience of working inside the CSIRO as a consultant for some time, you can get some truly brilliant people who just like being in that environment rather than being in a commercial environment. And it's enabling those people to work on ideas for the sake of the idea. That is a major reason why government spending and government subsidies can be worthwhile. And the classic, of course, being Kennedy. Now, of course, we know why Kennedy started the space race. Well, not the only reason, but the one that was a strong motivator. The Russians put a satellite and a person into orbit before America did. And oh my God, we're losing out to the Russians. Can't have that. So you go for the space race. And he says, we try to do these things not because they are easy, but because they are difficult. And in this situation, what that is allied to is the government money creation can enable you to do things without needing to acquire debt in the sense of private debt at the same time. And that is a freedom which enables you to harness creative energies. And it would be very hard to imagine a world without the space race in terms of what that did for technology and our use of space. And like technologies like this one right now, where a large reason why we're able to talk to each other is the existence of satellites, optical fiber, et cetera, and a huge part of that came out of the space race.
But even though you might be creating that money, the government might be creating that money, there's still going to be a ceiling, a point at which that, you could be creating a crazy amount of money if you just said, well, we want to research anything at all. So you're still going to have to pick and choose, aren't you? So,
you've also got the case where you'll create the money for putting putting parking stations next to railway platforms in your favourite electorates. And that's what we're seeing, an incredible level of rorts in Australia right now. One electorate with a Liberal seat next to a Labor seat getting 40
Steve
times.
Keen, you are sounding like a politician already. You've only been at the game for a week or two, and already you're just using me now as a sounding board to practice before you talk to
the rednecks
on the radio.
You're too clever to pick me up. Okay.
But look, just when you get into specifics, though, so let me give you an example. I just looked at an EU website for subsidies, an EU's website, calling for tenders to demonstrate the use of digital logbooks for buildings. And I quote, "There is a need to demonstrate and realise the potential benefits of using digital depositories of information that accompany buildings throughout their life cycle. These digital building logbooks, DBLs, can potentially result in greater efficiency, circularity and transparency in building stock," which all sounds a bit random. Now, this is not really, the government is offering a grant, so it's not really a subsidy. Well, it is a subsidy. They're wanting a company to produce these logbooks that are going to make buildings efficient. But why wouldn't if it's making buildings efficient, why wouldn't the private sector do that? But it's something so specific that you might say companies are just going to do this as a tax deduction for research, or it might be a better way of doing it. Actually, is to say, well, look, just if you're doing research, get a tax deduction. The scheme's available for that. This just seems a very specific thing. I'd rather, the situation that you're giving, the CSIRO, where you've got a group of people and you say, go and research stuff that you think is going to be useful for society. We'll put some sort of boundaries on it. But when you start getting into politicians giving very specific requirements and calling out for tenders for things that you're just thinking, well, how are they choosing that?
Well, in fact, when you look inside a lot of these, it's often because the government provides a way for companies to express common needs that they themselves can't fulfill. So, industries, it's necessary to have standards to enable products produced by one company to interact with products produced by another company. So, like, you imagine having one bunch of producers producing the cables for plugging into computers, and another bunch of companies producing the holes in the computers themselves. Unless they coordinate, you have an impossible environment. So,
but they would. They would coordinate.
Not necessarily. It often be hard to get people in the same bloody room. You may well find that particular example you've chosen may have come out of government consultations with the industry saying we need something like this to be able to progress or to get more. We all need it. We know that's going to reduce our costs, but it's none of us. If any of us do it independently, we can't get the same standard. We don't trust each other. So we need you to do it for us.
Yeah, but it does seem the government is getting in very. I'm not I come from a very similar side of politics to you, I'm happy to see the government get involved where it needs. But this seems getting very deep. Getting the boots on and getting stuck in the mud. You can't help thinking that if you go down to that level, at everything, the government is just going to be in this quagmire of things that they're involved in, all demanding money, and just where does it stop? And how do they ensure
I can actually use my brother-in-law as an example there, because one of the roles he had before he retired was he was on the electronic commerce board of the New South Wales government, and he found himself negotiating with the building companies over building up a database protocol to enable electronic contracts between the government and the private sector. And this was an initiative that the government began because they found themselves having to put out to tender to all the private builders, and it was easier for them if they could use online rather than paper documentation because it was easier to verify and transfer and so on. He ended up being poached by Boral. He was so good that they kept on making more and more offers, and he finally said, okay, I can't turn down that much money. I'll leave the public sector and go and work for you in the private sector. But it really was the state functioning as a coordinating body for the industry itself. And what it was doing is something that the industry wanted done, but it would be very, very hard for any of them to start it off initially because of the distrust between different suppliers.
Right. But they would sort it out though if it was stopping their businesses progressing. I mean that's.
Oh, here we go. I've got a neoclassical economist on the line. Hello.
No, hey, let me give you
Is it on the ground because somebody must have picked it up?
During the Great Railroad or Railway rollout in the UK, you had dozens of different companies building railways all around the country, but they seem to manage to agree, with one or two minor exceptions, on using the same gauge.
Oh, mate, for God Almighty, you're getting to put British Rail as an example of the private sector innovating. Holy hell! Well, yeah, but
of course it was enormous. Steve, the rollout of railways in the UK, I must acknowledge, was an enormous innovation. It spread far and wide.
19th century,
separate companies doing it and all agreeing.
And that was essential. The 19th century innovation was essential. And that was people seeing enormous profit by bringing in a brand new technology. But of course, that was a classic case of overinvestment. It was a good thing. I mean, and this actually is something that Schumpeter speaks about
engineering
quite well in the theory of economic development. He says that you'll get a new industry coming along, and the expectations of gain are so great that you get an overconstruction of the industry, and the initial creators will go bankrupt. But then in the aftermath, the society itself benefits from the increased infrastructure. And the same thing happened with the rollout of telecommunications in the 1990s in America. You had so much cable being laid that 90% of it wasn't even turned on. And that's why they call it the black. What was it called? You'd know it. It used to be in telecommunications. What they call the dark cable problem.
Dark fiber.
Yeah, dark fiber. Yeah, and I think they had about at least 10 times as much fiber laid as there was actually demand for.
Yeah.
Now that might be partly why we have cheap internet these days. So I'm not sure the extent to which that. I don't hear talk about dark fiber anymore.
Yeah. Because it's endless capacity, isn't it? Basically, that's the idea behind it. You don't have cheap broadband, of course, in Australia. So just on that, Elon Musk is wanting to, having actually said, and I know you're an Elon Musk fanboy, so come and give an answer to this, because he actually said governments shouldn't control capital. He's against government subsidies, although he has received billions.
But then again, these companies wouldn't have got the start without government subsidies. So,
well, there we are. Yeah,
it's one of these. I think you have to accept that they exist, and they're always going to exist, and it's a question of trying to achieve the best outcome for them rather than saying we should ban them.
Yeah, and where you draw the line. I'm just wondering where is there can you come up with a model of what's going to work and what doesn't? So Elon Musk is, for example, he wants to spend 16 billion with his satellite internet project, which is going to deliver, I think it's like low orbit satellite, so it can give low latency, fast broadband to the less urbanized parts of America. So should he get a subsidy for that? A man like Elon Musk, 16 billion, almost certainly.
This is partly Mazzucato's point that what you need the government spending for is to be the loss leader in an industry which ultimately you need. Nobody's going to say we don't need satellites, but satellites only came about because of the space race, which was initially the Russian-American rivalry, which is all run through the government sector. Now what we're getting is the end of it. You would imagine that that's a sort of public utility that should be run out by the government, but there's no longer any advantage for the government doing that. As a private innovator, and the difference with Musk's firms is this incredible emphasis on iterative design. So to get that sort of mentality into a government department, I think would be extremely difficult. It does work better in a private company, but to do it, you've got to have deep pockets.
Yeah, well, he has got deep pockets. The question is if he can make money out of it if he can make money out of it ultimately, why wouldn't he just go ahead? Would he need the government
He doesn't.
money?
The subsidies he's getting is most of his Falcon 9 rockets are putting government satellites into orbit. Not all of them, but a substantial part of the demand he's got is from governments wishing to put satellites into orbit. So even though he's saying he doesn't want a subsidy, a large part of his revenue is coming from government expenditure.
What if in putting these satellites out for consumers, though, he couldn't make the numbers match in that the cost of running it, of putting it up and maintaining it, and the payback over a reasonable period of time was more than the price that people were prepared to pay for it. So he would find that he doesn't actually have a sustainable service. Should the government then step in and say, well, okay, we'll subsidise you because we do want these people to get broadband?
Or you have the government buying the remnants of it after a private sector venture fails, which is another possibility. I mean,
but it wouldn't get it if he knew the numbers weren't going to stack up. He wouldn't pursue it, would he? So he wouldn't let it fail. He would have done his research.
The numbers well and truly stack up, and particularly stupid third world countries like Australia with terrible internet. I think he might be buying more than making money out of more than just rural areas with situations like the broadband situation in this country. So there's a crazy. I mean, going a little bit off at a tangent here, but we're on to my favourite subject, of course, which is the Australian broadband network. If he was to try and roll out a service and sell it within Australia, he'd have to pay, particularly if he was selling it into urban areas, he'd have to pay the government a cross-subsidy fee for the amount the government is spending subsidising broadband in the bush. I think it's about $5 a month per customer. That's why you'll never get cheap broadband, because everyone is paying for the very expensive cost subsidisation of a network that hasn't been particularly well rolled out in regional Australia. But anyway, and it should have been something which the government did in the first place, because again, this is one of the major reasons why we do want government subsidies. There are some services that you don't want to be related to the distribution of demand. Because the power of the product comes out of the network effect, and if you exclude parts of society from that network because it's not profitable to service them, then the network is less effective. So that's one of the best cases in terms of a government subsidy or government undertaking tasks which the private sector could also undertake. It's because if the private sector does it, they won't roll out to the entire network, whereas the government does, it will, and then that ultimately gives you a framework. But at a later stage, you can fine-tune what the government has done with the private sector network.
But do you, if you're providing something that is, touch and go as to whether it's going to be profitable in the short term, does the government subsidise the company that's providing that service and therefore is only supporting one company, or it might have to support several companies? It can't be seen to be just supporting one if there's others that want to play in the same game. Or does it support the public? So, for example, if taking the broadband, because it's a good example, does the government actually say, well, okay, we're going to pay companies to provide cheaper broadband in areas which it's going to be hard for them to match the price that people are prepared to pay? Or do they say, charge what you like, and we are going to tell everybody in those areas that they can claim back $5 or $10 or whatever per month? So that the subsidy is actually going to the consumer, and they still have that freedom to choose, and you still have that element of competition, because that's one of the problems, isn't it? If you subsidise,
I think South Korea did something like that. I think I've told you the story of the ex-leader of the South Korean Communist Party coming out to do some research with him 20-something years ago. Yeah, and wandering around the flat I rented for him, trying to find where to plug in his Ethernet cable, and I had to tell him, it's all dial-up modem over here, mate, and he was horrified. And then it turned out that the reason it happened is the South Korean government said, we don't effectively told the telecommunications companies, we don't care how you do it, but you have to collectively ensure that every house in South Korea has a what's it called, a T2 junction?
Yeah, I think so.
Which is Ethernet.
I just call them Ethernet points, but Ethernet
points. Or you can't operate in the South Korean telecommunications space. And look at the number of telecommunications companies that are South Korean these days. The fact that every kid had a Ethernet connection in his bedroom is a major part of why you've got enormous South Korean telecommunications companies developing over time.
So what about subsidies versus tax incentives then? So when I was growing up, did just about remember the pre-Thatcher era, and there were tax incentives for companies to locate outside the southeast of England, in a bit like Boris is trying to do now with free ports dotted around the UK, where there's a low tax or non-existent tax to try and encourage growth in those areas. The old growth pole theory that you invest in one town, the benefits are going to spread around the region. So pre-Thatcher, there was a bit of a carrot and stick going on in that you had that tax incentive to locate outside the southeast. You also had industrial development certificates. So if you wanted to build a factory over 5,000 square feet, this sounds very draconian these days, but you had to apply for an industrial development certificate, particularly if you wanted to invest in the southeast. So almost certainly would get refused because they'd want the that investment to happen in other parts of the country, where I think corporate taxes were also lower as well. So sort of a carrot and stick measure. Is that going too far down the one road? And is it better to do that where you're giving the freedom for companies to, particularly when you're looking at a problem like that, which is regional diversity, regional spread?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something I think we've got a hard and fast answer to, but if I'm going from people that I've dealt with who are engineers working in the public sector, a lot of it comes down to you want to have people working in the public sector who actually see that as their role to improve the overall society rather than working for the gain of an individual company. And if you have them and they're technically skilled and they're given the money necessary to do their jobs, then you can get a good outcome out of that. It's really basically getting away from the Buchanan attitude that everybody's in it for their own good, their own gain rather, not their own. Good's a bad word used in that situation. But they're only in it for their own gain, and you've got to constrain their behaviour, etc., etc. When you realise that people go into the public service because they actually want to serve the public, and if you provide them with the resources necessary to do it properly and a decent pay and decent stability, they won't get necessarily the same pay rates as in the private sector. But they don't want that. They want to do. They're happy to have a stable job and feel like they're doing good and being paid well. Then that sort of mentality ends up with a better outcome than trying to work out a set of rules that are what's the best way to do things.
So having more like the CSIRO, perhaps for different types of industry, where you're saying, well, okay, if there's market failures in this industry that need to be corrected, like that example we were giving about the digital logbooks for buildings, clearly very important, then there would be a government body that would be spending the time and investing in that, helping the private sector, and then once their work was done, then the private sector could pick it up and run with it. That sort of approach.
Yeah.
Rather than actually saying, well, we need someone else outside the government to do this and we'll fund you to do it. They should try and do it more themselves. Is that sort of what you're saying?
Yeah. So sort of what I'm saying. I mean,
the problem is
there are some things I'd never want the government to provide. For example, food. Okay, having been in a few institutions where you have government provide food, it's dreadful. You get this sort of automated kitchens and mass production of goulash, and that's all you ever get for lunch. That's where you want small, agile private sector suppliers, and you subsidise them to some extent. But for the large infrastructural stuff, it makes a lot of sense to have the government doing it itself. Yeah.
Well, actually, you've touched on a very important point there, which is food subsidies, because it seems like there's a million and one complexities there, because we support meat production rather than supporting the products that are better for us. So in the US alone, for example, meat and dairy receive 63% of the total agricultural subsidies. This is according to earth.org, the website. 63% goes to meat and dairy, compared to fruit and vegetable producers who only receive 0.04% of total subsidies. So that sort of explains why beef burgers are very cheap and fruit is very expensive, because we are helping the industry to ensure we lead an unhealthy lifestyle, because all the investment is going into meat and dairy products. All the subsidies.
And that is like, I'll take that as one example that I would be pushing were I in England, and that is I would like to see them borrowing as much as they can from the Dutch and having a lot of greenhouse food production, because if you have continued breakdowns in supply chain coming our way, then the 30% of food that the UK can't import will have to be provided domestically. And that's an enormously good reason to have greenhouses for growing things like fruit.
Absolutely. Not just food supplies, but I mean, almost getting back to where we started this discussion, but just how it's, it can be used for the wrong purposes as well. So the US exports a lot of wheat. Countries which are reliant on US wheat the US has a lot of political influence on those countries. So there's an incentive for government subsidies to lower the cost of goods to make them competitive internationally for political purposes, which is obviously not a good thing.
Yeah.
We need to make sure we avoid all of that. But I mean, agriculture is just. I mean, if you look at the the way the European Union has managed the agricultural subsidies, I mean, it's gone so badly wrong for so long.
Yeah, I mean, that's when I used to get dragged into school exercises all the time, looking at the food and agricultural policies. Yeah.
Butter mountains.
But the French argument was always back. We want to maintain our countryside, and when you spend a bit of time in the French countryside, you can sort of say, hey, but that didn't work out too badly. But of course, it's given immense political power to French farmers, which sometimes the French politicians rue having done.
Yeah, well, it's the same thing applies. The UK countryside is very dependent on agriculture as well. So I don't know how you solve all of that, but it's. I mean, the common phrase for subsidies is to compensate for market failure, isn't it? But whose market failure is it? I mean, you could argue that agricultural subsidies in Europe and the US are driving down crop prices, which is making it very hard for other nations to compete, for example. So developing nations who are very dependent on agricultural revenue are being left out to dry by those subsidies in Europe and the United States.
Yeah. I'm not going to try to answer that one. It's... But when you start
it just gets back to the argument, doesn't it, that for every single time you try and provide a subsidy, there's going to be an unforeseen repercussion.
This is why I need to think about things in a systems way, because there are unintended consequences everywhere if you simply focus on one part of the system.
Yeah. So, which gets back to, can you simplify it? I mean, could you, for example, say, well, okay, there will be so in the UK, for example, you can claim deductions for research and development. If you're a small business, you get an extra 130% on top of the normal 100% deduction you get on any cost. So you basically get a 230% deduction. I mean, it does sound like you could abuse that, but you actually have to show, to get that money, you actually have to show that you had a problem that you were trying to solve, and
and you have to
spend money to do it.
Yeah.
You also have to show actually that you were successful in it, which might be a bit of a problem because you could spend a lot of money and actually, for no fault of your own, get it wrong. But isn't that a bit easier? I mean, I like your idea that you've got to have people working within the public sector, and they could be overseeing this sort of thing as well as looking and in doing that, looking for market failure, things that they could get involved in. Almost like little hubs.
But see, the market itself, one of the reasons we have market failure is overcapacity, when everybody tries to dive into the same market at once in the belief they're the only ones who are competing for it. And this is one of the reasons, again, that government coordination is a sensible idea, because often it'll mean you have less wasteful investment, because the government's going to say, well, what's the level of demand capacity you're all trying to feed? Oh, you're trying to provide 2.5 times the expected demand. Let's just reduce this back a bit. And in fact, what the government subsidy ends up doing is reducing the level of overinvestment rather than causing more overinvestment.
Now, how's that happening? So let me try and find it.
In building capacity. I mean, for example, if you look at people building high rises in a city, then they will be estimating how many office businesses are going to open up and will need office space, and they will use and they will in effect. First of all, they'll all have optimistic expectations. This is the classic euphoric expectations thing that Minsky spoke so much about. And secondly, they'll try to capture more of that market share than they actually will end up doing. So everybody's targets are to get 1.5 times as much market share as they expect in a market they expect to be 1.5 times bigger than it actually is. And you get 2.25 times as much capacity being produced. So a government that says a bit of regulation here and says, hang on a sec, we're going to regulate you and slow you down. Well, let's now get together and do some capacity planning. Then that ends up with being a less wasteful system and leaving it to the competitive urges of the market system.
Right, but how do you do that? So if you say, well, okay, we've got 5 developers here who've all got over-ambitious targets, does the government say, you've got to whittle them all down by 20%, and then they come back and say, well, let's screw you, our business model doesn't make any sense anymore. And isn't it, when they've built it, if they've built too much, I mean, we're never going to have too many houses, are we? Let's face it.
Well, you're going to have too many skyscrapers, though. That's one of the classic indices of speculation, is the skyscraper index. And that's what you get coming out of it. If you leave it in an unregulated fashion, then you get runaway growth of skyscrapers and then empty offices. Like driving around Bangkok, which I was doing until recently, you see so many literally empty towers. I mean, concrete towers, 30, 40 stories tall, with not even any glass on the outside, because they're all being built during the 1997 boom. The 1997 bust happens, and they stand there as empty monoliths to a speculative bubble.
Yeah, well, you're talking bricks and mortars that may be a little bit different, isn't it? If you look at, for example, there's 1,000,001 delivery companies that have expanded during the pandemic. I mean, the roads. If I'm out for a morning cycle, I'll almost certainly get within an inch of my life from one of the early morning delivery vans. I was walking down one road the other day, and I saw a very short stretch of road, and there were 5 delivery vans in that one road at the same time, delivering parcels for Amazon and food deliveries and all that sort of stuff. So they're all over the place. Now, they have, they're all going for a slice of the market. They've probably got ambitious forecasts for what the next few years are going to be like. Some of them are going to be right, some of them are going to be wrong. In that case, who cares? Some of them will go under, some of them will survive.
Yeah, and there's a certain amount of chaos of the market is not a bad thing, definitely. But often what you get out of these government ventures is attempts to coordinate the market, with common standards that enable it to expand more rapidly in the future. So it comes down to respecting, I think, rather than having we should slash the government out of existence, respecting that a well-funded government with intelligent people working for it is likely to come up with more sensible compromises than leaving it to the badly trained mob we've got out of the Buchanan attitude to the public sector.
And I think your other point hidden in our discussion was the fact that they could act as a moderator as well, if they are that could help. Maybe not stipulating precisely how they move forward, but can provide evidence and mediation to ensure that they all behave sensibly. And with the offer of they might have some money if you behave and don't oversupply. We've got a few government subsidies which we might be able to send your way, which you might find useful. So, yeah, that could
happen. It could happen.
All right, very nice. Good.
Okay,
all right, next week I want to talk about this thing that's struck us all since the pandemic, the Great Resignation. What's causing that, Steve? We'll look at that next week. Thanks for your time.
Okay, all right.
And I should say Happy New Year as well. Thanks for listening to us all last year, and welcome to 2022. We'll see you next week. Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, then please share it with your friends, like it on YouTube, and subscribe to this channel.